so great to be back together with everybody. And we're obviously going through the book of Acts, and we have come to the last sort of story in the book of Acts, which is Paul's journey to Rome. He's been in prison for a while with us here. We've seen his trials and his testimonies. And so now let's follow along his journey to get actually to Rome, and we'll see whether we can get all the way to Rome today. So we're at Acts chapter 27 and verse 1. It says, "And when it was determined that we should sail into Italy, they delivered Paul and certain other prisoners unto one named Julius, a centurion of Augustus's band." And I just want to kind of remind us of a little bit of context here, that we're at Caesarea right now, which is sort of a capital city, sort of the region there. And it's also in the area where Philip the evangelist has settled after he evangelized that whole coast up north going from Israel. And it's also the city where the Apostle Peter first preached to the first Gentile converts. Cornelius, if you remember from Acts chapter 10, he was called a centurion of the Italian band. And so this guy is a centurion, also stationed at Caesarea. Don't know 100% whether they're stationed there at the same time or not, but very possibly. Julius may well rub shoulders with Cornelius. They're both officers, high officers in the army, and located in that same city, maybe at the same time. These bands, like the centurion is over, or a part of this band rather, and as near as I can tell, these names are just names. So Augustus band doesn't mean it's especially connected to Augustus, as far as I've been able to tell in looking things up. And Cornelius, it was the Italian band. They just have names. But in any case, one way or another, this centurion, Julius, has respect for Paul. And maybe this comes from some interaction with Cornelius. Maybe it comes from his awareness of what's been going on with Paul during the time that he's been in prison there in Caesarea. But whatever it is, he has respect for Paul, and we see this repeatedly in this process here. And remember, too, that the authorities had actually determined, you know what, we could really set him free. The judgment is to set him free. However, he already appealed to Caesar, so we don't have the power to set him free. But he's kind of in an unofficial sense, sort of been exonerated already, but he has to go to Rome. All right, so here we have Acts 27:2. We see the little ship there at Caesarea. His journey began at Jerusalem, and we already tracked him to Caesarea by land. Now, entering into a ship of Adramyttium, you see that city on the map up high there is Adramyttium. We launched, meaning to sail by the coasts of Asia, one Aristarchus, a Macedonian of Thessalonica, being with us. He's an individual who is mentioned other places in the New Testament. So this is Luke writing as an associate and companion of the Apostle Paul. And then they also have this other close companion and fellow minister in the gospel, Aristarchus. And the next day we touched at Sidon, and Julius, the centurion, who's over this whole prison transfer, courteously entreated Paul and gave him liberty to go unto his friends to refresh himself. So this is the region that had been evangelized by Philip way back in the earlier chapters of the book of Acts. And there's a good, solid Christian church there, and people who are very happy to entertain Paul and take care of him while he's there. And Julius let him just go hang out with his friends. And then verse 4, "And when we had launched from thence, we sailed under Cyprus," which to my ears, when I hear that they sailed under Cyprus, I think of that meaning to the south of Cyprus. But that's not the way they were talking about it at the time. They weren't thinking of standardized north-south maps, but under, as in under the shelter of Cyprus. because the winds were contrary. So that route we see on the map there would have been what that's describing. Verse 5, and when we had sailed over the sea of Cilicia and Pamphylia, we came to Myra, a city of Lycia. And we've dealt with these regions previously in Paul's missionary journeys, particularly the first missionary journey where they traveled through Cyprus and then sailed up basically to that Pamphylia and went up into the Galatia region just north of that. And then Cilicia, of course, is where Tarsus is, where Paul is from. Now, they're the centurion there at Lycia found a ship of, or at Myra rather, found a ship of Alexandria sailing into Italy, and he put us therein. Because this ship they're in right now, it's heading up north because that's where it's from, right? It's not trying to go to Rome. Now, to me, it's also notable, and I don't know a whole lot about this. It's something I'm kind of curious about, and it just catches me, that the Roman centurion doesn't have his own, imperial sea vessel to take. He's looking for private vessels to hop on. And I suppose somewhat commandeered to a mild extent to say, hey, you're going to take us, and we're not going to buy tickets, but you're going to take us, and we'll try to go along with where you want to go anyway, but we need to make progress and you're going to help us. The Roman Empire was not the biggest on navy. And so they don't just have just all these Roman imperial ships. So they're looking for ships to go. So here they found a ship that was going to go to Italy. So it's all right, well, we'll hop in with these guys. Verse 7, and when we had sailed slowly many days and scarce were come over against Cnidus, the wind not suffering us, we sailed under Crete over against Salmone. So here again, we're trying to use the shelter of Crete for the weather. And Salmone is a port city way over here on the east side of the island of Crete. So they came there, and it took them a while. So the journey is getting a little bit tougher at this point. And hardly passing it, came unto a place which is called the Fair Havens, nigh whereunto was the city of Lasea. So this is just a port where they landed. Now, when much time was spent, and when sailing was now dangerous, because the fast was now already past, Paul admonished them and said unto them, Sirs, I perceive that this voyage will be with hurt and much damage, not only of the lading and ship, but also of our lives. Nevertheless, the centurion believed the master and the owner of the ship more than those things which were spoken by Paul, which can't hardly blame him for that, right? Paul's not a sailor. This guy's a sailor, should know what he's talking about. So what we're talking about here, he said the fast was now already past. He's talking about the time of year that it is. And so we're coming into a season where the weather is going to be tough. Sailing is now dangerous because the fast was already past. It has nothing to do with the impact that fasting might or might not have on sailing. It has everything to do with the season. And they'd been here at this Fair Havens for quite some time because their sailing had been slow and everything's dragging out. So we're now in danger of a winter storm. But because the haven was not commodious to winter in, it's not a nice place to spend your winter, the more part advised to depart thence also, if by any means they might attain unto Phenice, and there to winter. Now, Phenice, don't be confused, way back over by Sidon, north of Sidon, is an area that you may know of as Phoenicia historically, modern day Lebanon. The New Testament calls that area Phenice also. It's a whole region over there on the coast of the Mediterranean. But Phenice is also the name of a city here on the island of Crete, over to the west side of the island of Crete. And so they're thinking, well, let's at least get out of Fair Havens because it's not a good winter location. Let's at least get over to Phoenix, a little farther to the west, and a better place to spend the winter. And it shouldn't be any big deal. It's not. We're not talking about trying to cross the whole massive Great Divide. We're just trying to get from one part of Crete to another part of Crete. Shouldn't be a problem, even though Paul warned them. Which is an haven of Crete and lieth toward the southwest and northwest, which that phrase confuses me to no end, how it could lie toward the southwest and northwest. I've read somewhere that it's actually describing the way the harbor opens up or something like that, but whatever. That's where Phoenix is, though. And when the south wind blew softly, supposing that they had obtained their purpose, loosing thence, they sailed close by Crete, up by the shore. But not long after, there arose against it a tempestuous wind called Euroclydon. And when the ship was caught and could not bear up into the wind, we let her drive. Just let the wind just take the ship wherever it's going to go. We can't really manipulate throughout this thing. So the Euroclydon is kind of like a hurricane type of a storm, and it comes up in the Mediterranean. So it's, we know about that here in Florida, maybe more so than some of you guys do where you are. These storms can be no fun. And I can't imagine being out on the open sea and caught up in a storm like this. Running under a certain island, which is called Clauda, we had much work to come by the boat, which when they had taken up, they used helps, which undergirding the ship, so like cablings, and fearing lest they should fall into the quicksand, strake sail, and so were driven. So we're not going to be able to port like we would like to. And we, being exceedingly tossed with a tempest, the next day they lightened the ship, tossing stuff out. And the third day we cast out with our own hands the tackling of the ship. We need to make this thing as light as possible to hopefully survive the storm. And when neither sun nor stars in many days appeared, and no small tempest lay on us, all hope that we should be saved was then taken away. But after long abstinence, so now we are talking about some actual fasting, not just a time of year. Paul has been fasting for a long time. And we actually learn as we read that a lot of people have been fasting, and they're in desperation right now. So after long abstinence, Paul stood forth in the midst of them and said, "Sirs, ye should have hearkened unto me, and not have loosed from Crete, and to have gained this harm and loss." In our studies, in looking at the Apostle Paul, we've kind of already noted that by personality, he's not above saying, "I told you so." And here he is again with a little bit of an "I told you so." Should have listened to me. And, so maybe you can listen to me now. Maybe you can take me a little more seriously now. And now I exhort you to be of good cheer, for there shall be no loss of any man's life among you, but of the ship. For there stood by me this night the angel of God, whose I am and whom I serve, saying, "Fear not, Paul, thou must be brought before Caesar. And lo, God hath given thee all them that sail with thee." So he's getting an affirmation, a confirmation of the message that he received that we read about previously, back when he was incarcerated on land, saying, "You've got to go to Rome. I'm going to take you to Rome. This is the way it's going to go." And now even on the ship, he gets this confirmation, which God is a nice person. It's amazing, but it's human nature. Even after you receive a word from the Lord and an assurance from God, a promise from God, you get into circumstances and then we can doubt it. It even happened to John the Baptist. He had been shown supernaturally that Jesus was the Christ, and he had, shared that revelation and put confidence in that revelation. But then he finds himself in prison and things look dark, things don't look good. And things look hopeless, and he's wondering, maybe I've wasted my whole life. Maybe I was misguided this whole time. And sent his followers to check in with Jesus and say, are you really who I thought you were? So this even the Apostle Paul is in a situation here where, yeah, he got a promise and he got an instruction, but now he's in a place where it's hard to continue to believe in it. And God is kind enough to send that extra word, that extra confirmation. So, you know, faith is a real thing. It's not just a concept. And because it's real, it's dynamic. In other words, it fluctuates and changes. Sometimes we can kind of get down on ourselves if we think we don't have faith, because sometimes we feel more confidence than other times. But I want to give you a little assurance that it's okay to wonder. It's okay to go have some ups and downs in your sense of confidence. But where the faith really comes down to whether we have faith or not is not about how confident we feel. It's about what choices do we ultimately make, and making those choices based on what we have chosen to put faith in from the Word of God, from God Himself, as opposed to making choices based on what we feel. The feelings will fluctuate, and there's no reason to be down on yourself about that. Every hero throughout the Bible has experienced that as well. We're human, and that's the way it is. But we seek God in these situations, and God is kind enough to give us a little. He kind of puts us in a place to where our faith is challenged, but then He will also reach in and give us that extra in the midst. I do want to also point out that this extra revelation that the Apostle Paul received, it didn't just come to him out of the blue while he's just kind of going on with just whatever and living life like a normal person. It came to him while fasting. Fasting is a means for seeking God. Fasting is a means for tuning out the flesh and tuning into the spirit, which is what our life is all about, is the power of the spirit overcoming the pull of the flesh. Fasting is one mechanism for advancing that cause. And through fasting, we can tune ourselves into the Lord so that He's able to give us some of these revelations and experiences and assurances, and take us to places in prayer and in revelation. Verse 25, Paul continuing says, "Wherefore, sirs, be of good cheer, for I believe God that it shall be even as it was told me. Howbeit, we must be cast upon a certain island." So he's already prophesying and foretelling that they're going to have a shipwreck and be on an island that they don't know about yet. Verse 27, "But when the 14th night was come, as we were driven up and down in Adria, about midnight, the shipmen deemed that they drew near to some country." So Adria is this area here that you see on the map. So now, you know, they were just crawling through these parts of Crete from one place to another, and even Crete itself is not far from Asia there, right? Asia Minor, where they traveled down from. All that's really close. Now they're way out here in the Adria, and this is where they've been dealing with this storm, out just very, very far from land, out in the middle of nowhere. And this is taking a while. The 14th night, they've been out on this boat in this situation for 2 weeks, not knowing every single day if they were going to live or die. But at this point, the shipmen deemed that they drew near to some country, and sounded and found it 20 fathoms And when they had gone a little further, they sounded again and found it 15 fathoms. And so this is some information I found that I don't really know that much about. I've actually always thought the sounding had to do with how far away the land was. I found some information that it has to do with the depth of the water. And maybe it does. I'm not really sure. Then, fearing lest we should have fallen upon rocks, they cast 4 anchors out of the stern and wished for the day. And as the shipmen, now, hold on a minute. I want to distinguish something for us here. Remember, this ship is a private ship. It's not an imperial ship. You have the centurion Julius, which I forgot to remind us that a centurion has a crew, he is over 70 to 100 soldiers. Paul is not the only prisoner that they're transporting. They're transporting a bunch of prisoners from Caesarea to Rome. Paul is just one of them. And he has a pretty massive contingent with, presumably the centurion's entire group is there, 70 to 100 soldiers. They are not sailors, they're soldiers. The Roman army is, their training and expertise is in land-based travel and warfare. The shipmen are these private people of this ship that's from Alexandria. Remember, that's the ship, it's from Alexandria. So it's 2 different groups. And you could even kind of figure, I would think, that the shipmen, this is our boat, this is our domain, this is our realm, this is what we do, are a little annoyed with these Roman soldiers just saying, okay, you're going to take us. Now, they were already going to Italy, so that's okay. But still, I'm not sure that these guys just sort of admire one another and enjoy having each other around, the shipmen as opposed to the soldiers. So as the shipmen were about to flee out of the ship, and when they had let down the boat into the sea, like a lifeboat, right, under color, as though they would have cast anchors out of the foreship. So, all right, what seems to be going on here is there are not enough lifeboats for everybody. And the shipmen, with their experience, have determined, you know what, this boat is going down. This is a problem. And I don't care about all the rest of these people. We're going to save ourselves. And so they go to start cranking some stuff down, like, we're going to crank this boat down because we need to be able to get to the anchors. And so, we're just taking care of some anchoring stuff right here. But what they're really trying to do is escape and leave everybody else to die in the ship. So Paul said to the centurion and to the soldiers, except these shipmen abide in the ship, you can't be saved. We're going to die if they leave. So then the soldiers cut off the ropes of the boat and let her fall off. So this is a conflict situation between the soldiers and the shipmen. The shipmen are trying to get away, and the soldiers like, not so fast. We cut the lifeboat off. You're staying with us, and we're all gonna, whatever's gonna happen is gonna happen to all of us. And while the day was coming on, Paul besought them all to take meat, saying, this day is the 14th day that ye have tarried and continued fasting, having taken nothing. So see there, everybody's been fasting. At this point, they've been fasting for 2 weeks. That's a long time. I personally have never fasted that long. I do fast. Fasting is a part of my lifestyle and my discipline as how I try to live for God and try to walk with God. And I have had times that I've fasted what to me was sort of an extended number of days, but never 14. I know quite a few people who have fasted 14 days and more. I've personally never done it. Everybody on this ship had fasted 14 days, not eaten anything. Wherefore I pray you to take some meat, for this is for your health, for there shall not an hair fall from the head of any of you. And when he had thus spoken, he took bread and gave thanks to God in the presence of them all. And when he had broken it, he began to eat. Then were they all of good cheer, and they also took some meat. And just a little clarification in case, the word meat, when we say it, we're talking about beef, pork, maybe chicken. Meat in the Bible just means food. And it's oftentimes used referring to bread or some type of bread-based thing, as it is here. And we were in all in the ship 216 souls. So yeah, this is not 20 or 30 people. This is almost 300 people in this ship. And that's where you have the centurion and all his soldiers, all the shipmen, other passengers, maybe merchants, who knows what all. And when they had eaten enough, they lightened the ship, cast out the wheat into the sea. And when it was day, they knew not the land, but they discovered a certain creek with a shore, into the which they were minded, if it were possible, to thrust in the ship. And when they had taken up the anchors, they committed themselves unto the sea and loosed the rudder bands and hoised up the mainsail to the wind and made towards shore. And falling into a place where two seas meet, they ran the ship aground, and the forepart stuck fast and remained unmovable, but the hinder part was broken with the violence of the waves. And the soldiers' counsel was to kill the prisoners, lest any of them should swim out and escape. You may be aware that one of the practices of many ancient societies and of this Roman society is, if you were responsible for a prisoner, if the prisoner escaped, you die. It's your life for his life. And if we remember earlier in the book of Acts, when an angel had loosed Paul and Silas and had opened the prison doors in the middle of the night while they were singing praises, the keeper of the prison was about to commit suicide because he knew that his life was accountable. He thought they had escaped and that he was going to be put to death. And they said, no, don't worry, we're here. Anyway, so that's why these guys are very concerned that none of these prisoners escape, because they can be held accountable to the point of being put to death. But the centurion, willing to save Paul, kept them from their purpose. Isn't that interesting? He actually did. Who knows about these other prisoners? Almost surely, at least some of these other prisoners are sure enough criminals, right? And they would think they would escape if they get a chance. The centurion is putting the lives of all of his soldiers at risk to be sure that Paul does not get killed right here. So, willing to save Paul, kept them from their purpose and commanded that they which could swim should cast themselves first in the sea and get to land, and the rest, some on boards and some on broken pieces of the ship. And so it came to pass that they escaped all safe to land. You remember what the angel actually had told Paul? Said, you're going to be carried all the way to Rome, and I have given all that travel with you. So Paul had been promised that nobody on that ship was going to die, and they didn't. So now we're at chapter 28. And when they were escaped, then they knew that the island was called Melita. So they're getting close to Italy and to Rome. And the barbarous people showed us no little kindness, for they kindled a fire and received us every one because of the present rain and because of the cold. Barbarous people, right? Like the word barbarian. I'm not really sure completely what to think about these people, but I do know that in the time of the Roman Empire, you had what were called Greeks, which kind of had to do with people like involved in Roman Empire type of stuff. And you have subjects, you have actual Romans, and you have subjects of the Romans, but then you have people who are just kind of alien to the whole thing, and they called them barbarians. So barbarians are not necessarily, like, I personally, when I hear the word barbarian, I think of like completely uncivilized, you know, who knows what they're going to do, eat an animal raw with their bare hands or whatever, you know. But that may or may not be kind of the state of these people. Like, one thing, and maybe we're talking about sort of like what I would call maybe tribal people, right? And they have their culture, they keep themselves separate from the established large scale civilization. But it doesn't necessarily mean that they are uncivilized. It just means they're not really part of the Roman Empire. So they showed us no little kindness. That means they showed us a lot of kindness. So they kindled a fire and received us every one because of the present rain and because of the cold. And when Paul had gathered a bundle of sticks and laid them on the fire, there came a viper out of the heat and fastened on his hand. Now, before I say anything about this viper, I just want to point out a little bit more insight into who Paul is. You know, remember that the Apostle Paul, during his travels, talked about the fact that as a minister of spiritual things, it would be very appropriate for him to rely on those he ministers to take care of him financially and his natural needs. And he even shared scripture that supports that idea that that's appropriate. There's nothing wrong with that. And yet he didn't do that. He did accept some offerings and he did accept some support, but he also much of the time worked a normal job. His background and experience for work was a tent maker, and he worked as a tent maker, even when he could have said, no, I don't need to do that or whatever. He's a hardworking man, the Apostle Paul, super diligent, and tended to just want to do things a little bit more than most people would have done. And so here, find yourself, you've been on a ship for 14 days through this storm, and you've just shipwrecked and sailed on. And you've got these people who thankfully have the kindness to them. And they said, we're going to take care of you and start to build a fire. Well, Paul immediately gets up and starts to help. Instead of just sitting there and allowing these people to show him the hospitality in a passive way, he gets active and starts to help make the fire. He's like, well, I'll gather some sticks. I can help with a fire. And so he does that, and he lays these sticks on the fire. And as he lays the sticks on the fire, a snake jumps out, bites him on the hand, right? And I guess what happened there is that he grabbed a big bundle of sticks, and there was a snake in the bundle that he didn't see in the process, but the snake didn't want to go in the fire. I can't blame him for that. And so jumped out and bit Paul on the hand. When the barbarians saw the venomous beast hang on his hand, they said among themselves, no doubt this man is a murderer whom, though he hath escaped the sea, yet vengeance suffereth not to live. So these people believed in karma, apparently, something along those lines, whatever they would have called it. There's superstition being that, yeah, you're going to get what's coming to you, and that's why you're getting bit. And so they just expected to see him die, and that was apparently what the universe was doing to him because he was a murderer. And he shook off the beast into the fire and felt no harm. Howbeit they looked when he should have swollen or fallen down dead suddenly. But after they had looked a great while and saw no harm come to him, they changed their minds and said that he was a god. Now, I want to point out something. I should have put the verse to pop up here, and I didn't. Sorry about that. But Jesus told his disciples at in sort of like the time of the Great Commission that there were going to be signs that would follow believers. And he talked about speaking in tongues, and he talked about laying hands on the sick and having miraculous healings, just believers, not necessarily preachers or whatever. And he talked about possibly drinking a deadly thing and not being hurt. And he talked about taking up a serpent and not being hurt. Now, if we just read that instruction out of context, like any, and this is an important principle for learning from the Word of God, if you read an isolated instruction, there are a number of ways that you might take it, and they're not all correct. Think of this. I think I'm going to take a guess that all of us here have taken advantage of YouTube to help us get some things done. Now, not that many years ago, if I wanted to try to fix my air conditioner out here, I would have to have a manual or somebody who already knew what they were doing. And if I had the manual, there's a really good chance I'm not going to understand what I'm even reading. And I could try, but really good chance I'm going to make a mistake with what I'm doing. The reason I'm talking about the air conditioner is because I did this about, I don't know, 4 years ago or so. My air conditioner outside quit working, and I normally, you got to call somebody to come fix it. Well, no offense to the poor guys who make their living that way, but I did not call anybody because I was able to just go on YouTube and watch somebody do it. And it was so easy to do. It's just a matter of ordering a part that I think it costs like $12, and just open up the right panel, disconnect the right cords, and connect them and put them in there. Now, I could have read an instruction about that, but I don't know if I would have really gotten it. But by being able to watch somebody do it, now I know exactly what the instructions mean. That's a very important principle with the scripture, because there are a lot of instructions, and like that we could take a number of different ways. And a lot of these instructions, particularly if we're talking about things that Jesus said, the record that we have to read of what he said is truthfully not every single word that he said on the subject. It's a synopsis, okay? It's a shortened version referring to what he had explained to them. So for me to try to go to his instruction and confidently say, okay, well, I got to do this. I mean, I am going to do my best to follow his instruction, but it helps so much if I can actually watch somebody apply what he did, right? Somebody who definitely knows. Well, the apostles definitely knew. He explained to them in great detail, and empowered them and entrusted them and equipped them to be those examples. So when we're reading this book of Acts, that's one thing that's so powerful and important about the book of Acts. It's the only place in the New Testament where we're actually given narrative stories to show us how to apply the instructions of Jesus. So when he talked about speaking in tongues, we read the book of Acts and we see how this was applied and who all did it and in what context and when and how this was done. We say, okay, that's what he's talking about. When he talked about laying hands and people being healed, we see that happen in the book of Acts. We see people just say, oh, just because somebody is sick, I'm going to take this step of faith and do this. We also see some places where apparently a person, Apostle Peter, Apostle Paul, felt a specific push, we might call unction in the moment for this to step out in faith and lay hands on someone. And we look to follow these examples. Well, what about the handling of snakes that Jesus mentions as a sign following believers? This is the example right here. Yes, the Apostle Paul handled a venomous snake. He was bit, and just like Jesus said, it did not hurt him. And it proved to be a sign of miraculous power, initially misinterpreted, but still recognized as miraculous power, right? They thought he was a god. He gets the opportunity now to set them straight about who God is, but it's a sign that made an impact on these people. But the example is not, he handled this snake by accident, okay? And so we should realize that. we do not find any example in the Bible of someone intentionally handling a snake because of the promise that Jesus gave about handling deadly snakes. It's not saying go out and do it. It's saying if it happens, you have this power that will be there and can serve as a sign. And it may well be that it happens not intentionally, but intentionally from the Lord to set up for a sign, which I feel very confident is what happened here. God knew that snake was in that bundle of sticks and provided this for to be able to make this impact. So in the same quarters, you know what? Let me just stop it right there. We're going to have a little bit more interaction with people on this island, not the barbarous people, but the people who are part of the Roman Empire. And then from there, we'll get Paul transported over to Rome, and we will wrap up what the Bible has to say about Paul's visit to Rome.